This meeting is being recorded. You should get a little pop-up on your screen right now that says it is being recorded. That's just a share for after. We're going to go through our vision of the budget. If our CTA rep, Sonia Lowe, can attend, she will be coming soon. She did have a prior commitment. So if she pops in, great. If not, I think we have it covered. So I'm going to start sharing my screen now. Welcome to BTA's little budget primer. I don't know where my share screen went. Share screen to share. All right. You should be able to see the general fund. Yes? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Somebody let me know.
Yeah, it's there.
All right, perfect. So this is from the latest interim report. This is from the March 15th one. It was actually included at the last board meeting, and this is where I got screenshots from. I went through the recording of the last board meeting, and I just took screenshots, and I was there to listen to what our Santa, the business services, executive director of business services, had to say. Oops. And so we're just going to point out some things. So our original budget from our LCFF sources, this is our base grant plus supplemental and concentration grant, was $39,822,000 and change. The board approved budget because some of the numbers had gone up and some of the assumptions had changed, went up to 40. Actuals to date are 22, and then projected year totals, because the budget changes once the governor's budget revise comes out. And so this reflects a change in some of those numbers as well as an increase in some supplemental and concentration funding, and as well as a little bit more COLA that we got this year. Okay, so that's all reflected here in the jump from 39 to 40 and then up to 41. This does spell out some of our federal, other state revenue and local revenue that are coming in. And then it's all totaled down here on line 5. So our total revenues for this year, projected totals are $70,738,775. Okay. There are differences between what we started with, the original budget that was approved, and here, but that's usually covered through COLA and other increases of funding that come along the way. The expenditures come down here. There's a couple of things that we like to look at as a negotiations team when we're looking at at these. So certificated salaries. This does include management for certificated though. So it's not just a pure snapshot of what the teachers are making, but that was original budget was $21.2 million. Board approved budget was a little bit higher, and the actuals to date are $8.2 million. Okay, this snapshot was taken as we were about halfway through the year. So it's been told to me, and it was shared with us, that you should be about halfway through your budget at this point. And as you can see, 8.2 million is not half of 21.6 million. So we're wondering how the district in half of a year is planning on spending about $14.4 million in certificated salaries. Okay, so that's kind of one of those things that we look for when we're doing these budget things. Now, we've done some historical analysis, and we've taken some of these kind of snapshots from previous years, and BTA has noticed a pattern. This pattern that has developed over the past 2 or 3 years is budgeting high, and then when your actuals come in, when you approve your unaudited actuals, our district seems to have had a very big discrepancy over the past few budget cycles. In the 1920, the school district budgeted $19.2 million in certificated salaries in their initial budget. When all the tallying was done, the district spent about $17 million. So there's a $2 million difference between what was in the original budget and what we actually spent on teacher salaries. If you go to 2021, it's about the same thing. There's $18.2 million budgeted for certificated salaries. That's in the actual budget. But when the actuals came out, the unaudited actuals at the end of the year, we found out that the district spent about $16.4 million. Again, about another $1.8 to $2 million in revenue that was budgeted to be spent somewhere and then not. And what we see is this a pattern starting to develop, where at the table, they say, I'm sorry, all of our funds have been budgeted. We have no more funding to do things like raises. And what ends up happening is that $2 million that was budgeted that they said that they couldn't give us raises with just disappears and goes back into another fund and doesn't actually come to certificated salaries because their actuals at the end of the year state that they over budgeted by about $2 million. Okay. There are some COVID anomalies that happen with those types of things, but it's not $2 million worth of anomalies. That's part of why we're fighting so hard to go ahead and get what's there. Another thing, we have $21.245 million in our original budget. Last year, we only had 18.2. So why an additional $3 million worth of budget in certificated salaries when everybody knows that we had retirees and we had people leave and we couldn't fill positions? So we seem to have less certificated employees this year than we did last year. Why is there a $3 million bump in budget costs with a shrinking staff base? So all the things that the district tries to explain away, and we haven't heard sufficient answers to any of these things yet. We can do the same kind of analysis for certificated salaries and employee benefits. We just haven't yet. We haven't done that deep dive because our goal right now is just to say, this is what we want from the district on salary, and you can afford it because look at how much money we found already that you seem to have either misappropriated, maybe misappropriated is a hard word, over budgeted would be a better word. So these are some of the areas that we because they said, if you can find it in our budget, we'll give it to you. So we're finding it. Okay, and that's just budgeting tricks right here that we can see that a district is using to overinflate their costs and then end up underspending in the end. There are other expenditures here that seem to be more inflated than years past. We haven't gotten into any of that. But we have questioned some of these expenses, like this $6 million board approved budget and capital outlay. That's supposed to be taking care of HVAC all over the district. We're still looking to see when exactly that's going to happen or what the plan is to spend some of that. But we know that some of these capital outlays and different funds are where different districts kind of put money and say, oh no, sorry, that's being taken up by this. And then it never ends up getting spent there. So that's one of those kind of auditing things that we have to look in and make sure the district is actually spending money where they say they're spending money. Okay. I know a lot of the HVAC expenses are being justified through different ESSER funds as well, through some of the COVID monies. I know that that was a big concern when they reached out and they surveyed people. I don't know how many survey answers they got, but HVAC was one of the main concerns that came out of that. So maybe that's why that's a portion so high. We haven't really gotten into that. After all that comes down, this green box at the top is the projected totals to date. Our total revenue is 70.73. Our total expenditures is 67.98. That means that we're bringing in more money this year than we are spending. And that is in about the amount of $2.7 million. Okay. $2.7 million extra this year that we have been budgeted not to spend. That is a budget surplus. Okay, so this was what was presented. There was another form or another spreadsheet that was presented that I took a snapshot of that I'm going to bring up now. And this goes to speak of our 3-year. Here we go. Multi-year projections. District loves talking about multi-year projections. Why? Because they have to justify to the LA County Office of Education that we can be fiscally solvent for the next 3 years. And there's a certification that comes with that. If you can make your bills for the next 3 years and still have your your reserves, your 3% that's mandated by law, and you still have that at the end, you're positive. Your budget passes with flying colors. If you, at the second or third year, might have some trouble making payments and keeping that reserve, it's a qualified budget. And if you can't make any of it for any of the years, they send you to the doghouse and they bring a fiscal advisor, okay? Because that's seen as very, very concerning to them when you can't pay your bills, right? So here we go. This is the 2021 projection. This first column is this year alone, okay? This is this year alone. You can see here's that $70.7 million. Here's the 67.98. Here's that 2.75 that is left over. Now, this has a new column in it, and this is restricted one-time funding. And this is the funding that the district got through COVID funds or from some other area that they cannot spend on ongoing costs because it is one-time funding. It's bad practice to spend your one-time monies and put it into somewhere that's going to cost you years out, and we get that. And the district has kindly taken that money out of the equation here so we can see exactly what that is. So at the end of the year, this is unrestricted budget. We have a $2 million budget surplus in unrestricted funding for this year alone. $2 million unrestricted this year alone. 308,000 of that is restricted one-time funds. 402,000 of that is just restricted monies that need to go to specific areas. So that is where you get your $2.75 million budget surplus. The beginning balance, that's what they brought over from last year. This is the money that they put in that little piggy bank and they didn't spend, and this is carryover from last year's budget. So they have $14 million in carryover. And the estimated ending balance is $16.4 million, just sitting there that the district is holding on to. Non-spendable is 25. We didn't get clarification on that. But the reserve for economic uncertainties, the 3% that the district is mandated to keep in reserves for economic uncertainty, is mandated by the state, is just over $2 million. That leaves them at the end of this year with a total budget of $16.4 million. If you want to know what percentage of our actual budget that is, that we have in savings in reserve, that is a 24.16% reserve. The state only mandates that they keep 3, but our district is keeping 24.16% in reserve, okay? That is for this year alone. Next year, all of these things carry over. So let's look at it. Next year, if you look at these funds up here, our LCFF sources, 41 million, it drops a significant amount. It drops $4 million about, okay? And that is various factors. There's a thing called the ADA cliff. So during COVID, we've been held harmless for any of our students who have left. And we are still being funded on our numbers of students that are coming to school from 1920, okay? Now, every year since then, for declining enrollment for almost everybody in the state, our numbers have gone down, but we've continued to be funded at that old 1920 level. Well, in 22-23, that goes away. And so now we will be funded at our actual ADA for P1 and P2, which means that we can lose anywhere from, I think it's 300 to 400 kids, which means a decrease in revenue from 41 to 37. That's a little simplification. There's also some supplemental and concentration monies in there that have fluctuated because of our unduplicated pupil count. That means when we have English language learners, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, our homeless and foster youth, all of those students that we have in our district, they bring us extra money in the supplemental and concentration grants. Our percentage of those students in our district is crazy high and one of the highest in LA County. We used to be at about 94%. Those numbers have fluctuated. It went down to about 86 at one point this year. I'm pretty sure we're back up to about 90 right now.
Yeah, and it's one of the highest in the state as well, Tom.
Yes. So We do get extra money because we have to serve students of high needs. So that is reflected here within this unrestricted LCFF sources. Okay, we have federal revenue, we have state, and we have local revenues. That brings our total budget to $37,920,000. As you can see, it's about $5,000 less. Sorry, $5 million, $4.3 million less. Okay, we also get restricted funding over here. That goes from 9 million to 6 million. Okay, so $3.7 million less. So we get a total less. It's a little disingenuous to say we went from 70 to 44, but it is a steep fall off. Even if we don't take these one-time funds, these restricted one-time funds out, we're still declining in our budget. Okay, and it's not only a concern for Bassett, it's a concern across the state. Every district in the state is worried about this. They call it the ADA cliff. And there's legislation in the works right now to change the way we fund education so that this cliff is not insurmountable. There's a couple different options on the table. The one that it looks like they're going with is a 3-year rolling average, where it will lessen the blow of this ADA cliff. But it's not just a Bassett problem, it's an everybody problem. Okay, that's why there's statewide legislation to take care of it. All right, let's look at our budget assumptions here again. So for expenditures, 13.7 million in the restricted area for certificated salaries, 3.5 in restricted, and that comes to about 17.373 million. Let's look at that number from last year again. It was 22 million. So when there's a big swing of $5 million in certificated salaries, that makes me question which of these numbers is incorrect. Okay, what are the assumptions we're making that we're going to be paying our certificated salaries, our certificated people, $5 million less from one year to the next? I know that March 15th is tomorrow. I know that our district did not roll out a ton of RIFs this year. So this means that we're not getting rid of certificated salaries. That means that we're not laying off people. So where is the $5 million swing from one year to the next? Is it an over budgeting in 21-22? Or is it a misappropriation somewhere within our 22-23 projections that is leading us to have these wildly different figures for what should be a somewhat stable metric in your budget? Okay, that's one of the questions we've asked the district. Certificated salaries don't go down, or sorry, classified salaries don't go down that much. They go down about $1 million. And when you're losing about $5 million in your budget, and that means your district is shrinking, that means you hire less people, or you have a need for less classified and certificated staff, I can see a shrink within these budgets. That's a reasonable assumption to be made, that we'll be losing about $600,000 in classified salaries. Benefits, that's a big one as well. Most of the people in the district take benefits. What kind of change is that over the years? And is it as big of a change as our classified salaries? We go from 11.8 to 10.8, another drop in about $1 million. So here's the one that I think, as unit members, we look at and we say, what is our district doing? Because for other services and operating expenses, it's about $10 million. And what are those? Those are contracts. Those are people that they go out and hire to consult or to do a job that the district feels that they need help on. They feel they need $10 million worth of help to help run this district right now. Those are questions we have. We've been harping on this district for spending money on consultants and other things instead of putting it in the classroom for years. And this shows you last year, or for this year alone, we have a projection of $10.5 million spent in other services and operating expenses. Now, 100% of that is not consultants, but our percentage that we spend on consultants is disproportionate to any district around us. So that's another area we can be asking the district questions on, and we do. That does drop about $4 million. They said they are committed to hiring less consultants, and we'll see when we look at the actual budget and take a little bit of a deep dive into it, whether or not this about $4 million in savings is actually from not hiring consultants or from other operating expenses that they're going. We come down here to total expenditures. We have about $35 million unrestricted. We come over here, combined, it's about 48. Once again, this year's off because we have restricted one-time funds. But like I said before, there's a significant change to our district finances. If all stays as it is now and we face that ADA cliff, we are looking at a deficiency of $4.2 million. Okay, that's more, we're spending more than we're bringing in right now. Our revenues are 44. We have some chargebacks here, but this is about 48, about $4.2 million is what they're estimating. Other sources and uses, we're still getting a look at this about what these unrestricted, they transferred some unrestricted costs to restricted costs. That's kind of the thing. Why do you transfer money you don't have a restriction on to somewhere you do? Those are questions we're asking the district. But our net increase is about 3.8 million in unrestricted funding, 4.2 total. Okay, but this is where our savings from that they have in this year come in. So we bring this $16 million over. It's actually 19 when you look at it as restricted and unrestricted. We tend, as a unit, we generally tend to look at the unrestricted monies only because that's more freely spent than some of these restricted funds. But in total from last year, both restricted one-time funding, regular restricted funding, it's about $19.6 million that they're bringing over from last year. So when you have a $4.2 million shortfall and you have $19.6 million in the bank, you're left with about $15,400,000. Okay. Well, Tom, what is the percentage of the budget that is? Well, our percentage in reserves actually goes up because our budget fell by so much. So when you have a bigger savings and a smaller budget, it becomes more of your reserves. So now next year they have a 26.09% reserve. Okay, how much do they have to have for economic uncertainty? They have to have 1.45 million. They have 2.6 times that, 15,398,000. Okay, so the district seems to be holding on to money here, and it has always been our unit's philosophy that if you have this healthy reserve, you're not paying your teachers enough, and you need to put some of that money towards your teachers. And the district has consistently managed to not do this for so long that we are so far behind in pay in all of our surrounding districts. Okay, other districts have been. We hear lots of units in our surrounding districts that are reaching agreements already, and they're getting COLA, and they're getting above COLA. And COLA is 5.06% this year.
And they're going to the reserves in order to do that.
Yeah, and the other districts are going to the reserves to do that. Everybody's facing this funding cliff, ADA cliff. Okay, but other districts are using their reserves to make sure that the cost of living increases that are going around and the inflation isn't hitting their teachers or their staff. This is what we're asking for.
If I understand correctly, Tom, it appears that the district's going to have money without even touching their reserves, correct? Just if we look at, you said so.
They will have to touch some of their reserves next year.
Okay, so in 1920, they over budgeted almost $2 million in certificated salaries, and then
just in certificated salaries.
Okay, and then the same thing again in 2021. And then I heard you say that they budgeted $3 million more for this year, and which makes almost over $5 million more budgeted in certificated salaries if we estimate. So if that $8 million that they've already paid, let's say that by the end of the year it's going to be 16, So they'll still be over budgeted 5 million, which makes sense. So just with that alone, the cost of 1% for teachers is
206,000.
got it. Thank you.
And that's a sustaining increase to our budget. So if we get paid a 1% raise this year, it'll add $206,000 to our certificated salaries, not only this year, but ongoing. Okay. Those 1 year raises have a compounding effect on the subsequent years. It just becomes a new cost. Okay. So this is after second year. Okay. Second year, we seem to be deficit spending about $4.2 million, but our reserve percentage goes up because our district has saved so much money over the past 3 and 4 years. Okay. We get out to the third year. Okay. This is where a lot of districts have trouble because the revenue is not meeting what they're spending. But here we can see once again, our district is maintaining, and actually it looks like their unrestricted budget does go up a little bit. And if we look over here at combined, it's 44.1.3, 44.353. Lots of different things go into this, an increase in funding for supplemental concentration. COLA is also something that's going to be going into this. We have a good COLA for the next couple of years. So that's why we see some increases when we know we have declining enrollment. So they're spending 44. They're spending about 17 this year combined in certificated salaries. They're spending about 17 this year certificated salaries. Okay, that seems to be consistent. We don't seem to be losing a lot of people. There doesn't seem to be big dips or big raises. It's just consistent. If you roll down here, we do have an increase of funding, and that makes some of these balances a little bit better. Previous iterations of this have this at over $4 million of deficit spending for the district. It's gone down to about 3.2 now, $3.2 million. So we're spending $3.2 million than we're estimated to be bringing in. Okay, and let's look down here. Our net decrease is 3.2 million. But once again, we add that balance that we have down here, 15.389, and we still have $12.192 million at the end of our third year out. That equals about 19.7% in reserves. Once again, state says they have to mandatory 3%, 1.4 million. Okay, we got like 6 times that sitting around. $9 million in unrestricted funding at the end of 3 years after deficit spending by $7.4 million for 2 years. Okay. $9 million is a lot. When you put $9 million in the terms of a percentage that BTA could get on their salary, 10% is about $2 million, just over 2 million. Okay. 2, 4, 6, 8. It's 40% when you bring it down to salaries. We're not asking for that. There's no way we're asking for that because it would be unsustainable in the long run. What we are asking for is to be paid fairly and adequately to the districts that are surrounding us. Look at our high percentage of unduplicated pupils. These are pupils who are low socioeconomic status, foster youth, English language learners, homeless kids. We have a disproportionate number of these students. And our compensation is so far behind our surrounding districts who have nowhere near our unduplicated pupil count. No way are they facing the challenges we're facing in the classroom every day. The challenges inherent with these special populations. They're not. And yet, we can go 5 minutes down the freeway in any direction, go down the 60 toward the east, you're in Diamond Bar, Walnut, Pomona, they get paid great. You go the other way, we're in Mountain View, we're in other districts, they pay great. You go north, we're in Duarte, we're in Pasadena, we're in Glendora, they're paying great. We go south, we're in Whittier, Little Lake. All these places we can go in a 5-mile drive are getting paid more. And they don't have to deal with the tough situations with our students every day like we do. And all we're asking for is to get paid fairly like the districts around us. Last thing, I know I've thrown in a lot of numbers at you, okay? This is the last thing. So I mentioned a solution for this ADA cliff, for this massive drop in funding. I mentioned it, and it is in the legislature. And there are, it's AB 1607, and it's pending approval. And Santa mentioned this in her interim report, so I'm mentioning it now because if she thought it willing to bring it up, I'm going to bring it up to you guys and let you know what's going on. So if the governor's 3-year average gets approved, that means not getting a huge ADA hit in 1 year, but averaging the 3, and so it's a little bit less each time. This is how our numbers change, okay? So our surplus or deficit, our surplus this year with budget adjustments, it's not going to change for this year, is this $2 million. This is unrestricted funds, okay? Let's look back, 2.04064, okay? Unrestricted fund balance, here we go, $2 million. So these are our out years. If the third option proposed by the governor is approved, we will get an increase to next year's budget of $3.8 million. That will change us from, I'm gonna lower the screen here so we can see it. It used to be, oh, it's right above. It used to be $3.8 million. Our 4.7 up here, our increased COLA came in, that 4.7 went down. That's why it says 4.2 in the previous budget. Our surplus deficit is this $3.8 million. But the additional funding with this LCFF increase, if the governor's proposal is approved, will increase our LCFF by $3.8 million. That means we won't be deficit spending at all next year. That means we'll have $22,000 above our costs. So it's a small surplus, but it's still a surplus. And it's a $3.8 million swing for us. That means that instead of this number being $15.398 million, if everything stood as it was now, it would go back up to 19.065, putting us, and I'm doing the math off the top of my head, at over 30% reserves. 30% budget that we have in the bank not being spent this year for teachers and students that are going to school now. I can tell you right now, if that's not one of the highest in the state, I would be shocked. 30% reserve. Last, if the governor's budget's approved again, we would get an additional $1.44 million in COLA. That brings it down to 3.2, and an additional $2.1 million added to our increase in our LCFF, which means that instead of budget deficit spending by, I'm pulling this down so I can see, $3.205 million right there, we would be deficit spending by $1.036 million. And remember, we would have $20 million in the bank, and we would be deficit spending by 1. Okay, now this is all pending funding, and our executive director of fiscal services was very adamant in letting the board know this only happens if this AB 1607, the third option proposed by the governor, is passed. Okay, but it seems like it's going to, and so this will greatly improve the financial position of the district. Lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about our last letter to you guys. I'm pulling it up right now. I have way too many things open on my screen. If there are any questions so far, if you can raise your hand and we'll have somebody unmute.
There is one question inside the
Sure.
chat. And it is, do the law firms the district hires fall under the consultant cost?
Depending on how they're hiring them, there are different places you can put those costs within our district.
I know that if they're talking about the one on the past board meeting, it specifically said both of those were out of the general fund.
So that would be unrestricted monies, and they can be pulling it from some of these other services and operating expenses. That's generally, it's just, this budget line item is a reference to a string of codes. And if they code something within that number frame, it goes under there. And so I think a lot of those costs are in there.
Right. It becomes kind of a shell game. They move money from one spot to another and to give it a better look.
So if you didn't have a chance to read our last communique, I'm pulling that up on the screen for our last thing before we get into this. Okay. So they continue with their pattern of offering insultingly low percentages. And they still continue to claim poor. They say that this unrestricted money can't be used on salaries. And our information says that that is not the case. And it doesn't seem to matter that we're one of the lowest paid teacher groups in the San Gabriel Valley. They just want us to be quiet, put our heads down, and do our job. They also continue to divide us by trying to separate certain portions of our membership out and not give them anything at all. Okay, offering nothing. And we're like, I'm sorry, I have a unit. We are a unit, we come together. I need to get something for all of my members. They still insist, nope, we can't offer that to these members. Their total salary package comes in at 3.5%. If you do the math, oops. If you do the math real quickly, that's like 205 times 3.5. It's about $717,000 that they're offering us in total compensation to move forward. This, oh, and they have a 1.75% bonus. It's another $400,000. So just about $1 million in compensation total package. They're sitting on $2.7 surplus this year alone. Okay, $2.7 million total funding, $2 million in unrestricted funds that they are not doing anything with. In fact, they're just adding it to the pile of $19.6 million in reserve. Okay, like I said, the 3-year projection has their district sitting at $9 million as a reserve above what's statutorily needed by the state, 19.71%. They also offer no additional increases to our benefits, even though we ask. They have remained status quo every single meeting about not offering anything on benefits. The situation is this, and we heard this from the lips of somebody on their team. We have the money, we just don't want to give it to you. We need to be united, we need to stand together, and we need to convince them that the teachers are where you need to put this money. Stop spending money on programs that nobody wants or uses. Stop spending money on things to put in the classroom. The thing that you need to focus on is the educational specialist in the room, the one who works with the child day in and day out, the one that knows where that child is falling short and where they are excelling, and knows the ways to motivate these kids. Jorge Avila brought up, what is our district doing about learning loss? You know what? The only thing that I can tell from where I'm sitting is they're just testing the hell out of them. I have never seen a year with so many tests. Every single 2 or 3 weeks, we're testing, leaving no time for us to act on that data, to get in there and do the work, to help get these kids back to where we all know that they need to be. It's not going to happen overnight, but some of the strides that we have been able to make over the past 1.5 years are tremendous. And we knew coming in that they were going to be testing low. And every single one of us knows the struggle that's going on within our classroom to get these kids to where they need to be. Nobody sitting across from us at that table knows that struggle at all. And it's up to us to stick together, to come together, and to let them know to stop putting their money in places that's not helping. Anybody else from the team have anything to say? Because I think I'm talked out.
There's one more question, Tom, in the
Sure.
chat. It says, do administrators also increase their health benefit costs?
I would have to look into that. I do not know the answer off the top of my head. But if you look at Transparent California, the teacher benefit packages and the administrator benefit packages are nowhere near the same.
So yeah, that would be the district share of costs. But I can tell you on the JPA side that it is one specific amount to all. We all get charged the same amount.
I don't see any others in the chats. If anybody would like to raise their hand, we can call on you. If not, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Good work, Tom. I don't think it could be explained any better than you did. And Tom's right about the fact that